Let's move on to the next part of your career. You were at Reading for until about 58.
Yes, 8 years.
Then what?
I went to Manchester rather reluctantly. If Gordon was a difficult man. When I was invited to the chair at Manchester, I didn't want to go. And if they'd have given me a leadership at Reading, I would have stayed. But they would. He said that a chair at Manchester is one thing, but it doesn't outweigh a lectureship. Anyway, it wouldn't help, and I needed more salary actually because I had 2 children.
You were married and had 2 children.
And so I went to Manchester with a big upheaval that entailed, and a rather grim place it was in those days. It isn't now. It was a difficult time from the family point of view because it was before the anti-smoke law came in, and my children who were then, they moved there when they were 2, the twins were 2. They were ill all the time, and finally the doctor said, you're going to have to take them away from this area, because otherwise they're going to have chronic bronchitis. So we started on my trek again, this time to Bristol. And I didn't stay there because I was asked to go to London and so on.
You've travelled around a lot.
Too much, yes. Restless.
Restless. Well, it sounds as if you were partly pushed. I mean, you wanted to stay.
I really wanted to stay at Reading, yes. Mind you, it wouldn't have remained exactly as it was in these idyllic times, I think. It enormously expanded for one thing. It was in an old house when I went there, a big old house on the Oxford Road in Reading, where the floors in the upper floor were so insecure that you weren't allowed to have more than 2 students at a time.
And 3 books. Well, let's, I mean, just for time, let's skip over till Cambridge, is that all right?
Yes, of course, yeah.
That was about 1960. When did you come here? That was
74.
74. Ah, this was to the Edward the Seventh chair. Do you remember coming here and any impressions when you first came to Cambridge? Did you come to King straight away, or?
Well, there is that curious sort of begging bowl thing. You go and you try to find out which college will have you, or which is entitled to have you, because there is a quota.
Yes.
I think. And King's had its quota. I think I was offered fellowships from Fitzwilliam and Peterhouse. I was strongly advised by Noel Allen to have nothing to do with either of those. In fact, he strongly advised to have nothing to do with Cambridge.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Because of the bad temper of the English faculty.
Oh yes, already bad-tempered.
Terrible.
To get worse later.
They've had lawsuits, all sorts of things. Anyway, he wanted me to stay in London, and in a way I would have been perfectly happy to do that. But then I was persuaded to do it, and Anne and Leach worked out some way of evading the restrictions on having me at King. I don't know how they did that. I exceeded the quota. There's something in the statute.
Notwithstanding.
Notwithstanding. Yes. And then I had to take another year at London for some reason. So in fact, it was all settled in 73, but I came in 74.
You mentioned Edmund Beach, and he was provost at that time,
Yes.
and you interviewed him. Did you get to know him at all well?
Well, patchily.
Hmm.
He was not awfully easy to get on with, I think.
No, cantankerous.
Sometimes I had a wonderfully good time with him. I remember we were in New York together.
Hmm.
And it was like being on a student. We had such fun.
Hmm.
It wasn't like that normally.
No, other times he was grumpy and...
Yeah.
Hmm.
I remember him at Electors Fellowships. We sit patiently while many cases were discussed which had very little chance of ultimate success. And then far into the afternoon, he would suddenly explode
Okay.
and insist that people attend to what they were doing and to the likely outcome. But still, you must have served many times on that committee.
Yes, I was on the Fellowship Electors just before that, between 71 and 75, 74.
It's the most interesting committee.
Yes, it was, at that time it's filled with all these Nobel Prize winning Brenners and Reeses and
I remember, one of the things I shall always remember about King is a meeting of the electors where Martin Reeson got onto the list two very brilliant young men who were interested in what he was interested in, and Sydney gave them a terrific grilling. And Martin said, when they'd left, he said, "You weren't interviewing for the Nobel Prize."
Mildly. Yeah, Sydney was pretty savage, and then Dan Mackenzie was also on it here. I was going to, we've skipped on to King's. Were any fellows of King's close friends of yours, or you like to talk about any of them in particular?
No, I think in a sense I suppose I arrived too late in life to make that kind of friendship.
Tony Tanner must have been here then.
Tony Tanner he wasn't actually here when I arrived. He was in America. He had resigned actually. He'd gone to Hopkins and decided immediately that it was a disastrous.
Yeah, so it's typical Tony.
And then he had an illness. The question then was this is a good thing about King's, I think, and I dare say it would be true of other colleges too, but since there was a clear vacancy in the faculty, in fact a vacancy was advertised, it didn't seem unreasonable that he should apply for his own job and get it. The snag was, it was far easier to do that since it was a faculty post being advertised. So far easier to do that than getting back into King's. And Edmund was a bit stiff about that. There really wasn't any certain reason why he shouldn't go back into King's. And there was always this danger of his breaking down and so on. However, it was worked in the end, but in the end, of course, he did break down. Great loss, I think.
Yes, he was a charming man, very sweet. Did you know Chris Prendergast at all well? He was.
I don't know him well.
Because he's, sort of literature.
He's never, or very rarely here.
No, well, he sort of left quite a long time ago and comes back sometimes, but.
Well, he's in Denmark.
Yeah, most of the time. Too close to Iceland for your liking.
Well, I like Denmark actually. He married somebody in Denmark.
Yes, that's right. Yes, had some personal reason for being there. Have you? Having been to a lot of Victorian and other universities, what do you think about the Cambridge setup, the college system, and the way Cambridge works?
I think it's mad in a way, because it does work. partly because people wanted to work, and but it is. When I first came here, it seemed to be expected of me that I would do something about the mess that the English factory was in. But of course, I immediately made enemies as a result of trying to do that. And it was a total failure, everything I tried, complete failure. And then I saw how many vested interests there were in keeping things exactly as they were. I remember people for whom I have certain respect, like Hugh Sykes Davis, John. This kind of vision of Cambridge, which is admirable in its way. It's like sort of a Platonic academy, you know, teachers walking by the banks of the river. So, and none of this, we discovered, some people who worked with me on this, that there were people there were undergraduates who had been through their 3 years and never been taught directly by a member of the faculty. Well, this is a scandal, I think.
Taught by postgraduates and so on.
When we did a report on it, we reported to the annual faculty meeting, and it was ruled out of order. People didn't want to discuss it. So we did lots of disappointments like that. I thought it would be a help to Christopher Ricks, whom I admire and have admired ever since he left Oxford.
I hope to interview him too. I was at Worcester when he was there, yes, and some of my best friends were taught by him, so I'd like to.
Well, he's the dazzler in our midst, I think, but a very difficult person. A lovable man in many ways, but extraordinarily difficult.
This is going to go on to the internet. He will forgive you, I'm sure.
Well, I think he would accept that description. I think he'd rather like to be called lovable.
Lovable and difficult. Yeah. But Christopher was egging you on to reform this place, or?
Well, no, I was egging when there was a vacancy. I worked to get him here, which we did. We got him here. And that, of course, was like dropping a match into the powder. After that, there was bitter enmity on both sides. Not what I thought. I knew Ricks well, and I thought we're not so different in our views about things as all that. And if we worked together, we might be able to make some sense of this place. But we couldn't.
You did work together, but you couldn't make sense of it.
We didn't really work together. I think we really got two different parties developed within the fact. And the end was really by packing it in. I think I just got so tired of it all, I couldn't do it.
Well, the final events, which I don't know whether you want to talk about, were going on just when I'd been here a few years and I was on the edge of it. And I remember signing ballot papers and furious discussions, which I never quite followed, about Colin McCabe. What was that a part of this deeper difficulties, or?
It was very much part of it. It was very complicated, and in brief, McCabe had done his probationary time, and the time had come to say whether he was going to be promoted or not. Ricks was violently opposed to him, not without reason, although he and I went to McCabe's lectures and found great improvements in them, and he implicitly even admitted this, but he just didn't like McCabe. A lot of people didn't. I didn't particularly like him myself, but I didn't think he ought to be treated in this way. Anyway, there was a big split of McCabe. It was complicated by the fact that Geoffrey Hill had applied for I think just a lectureship, and Ricks was a great supporter of his, and he kept on saying, is this a faculty which will keep McCabe and reject Geoffrey Hill?
Well, was it an alternative? I mean, in other words, couldn't McCabe stay and Geoffrey Hill come as well?
Of course. But still, he said it's a malign conjunction. You turn away the greatest living poet, which I don't believe actually, but it's still another ground for discussion. And you keep the charlatan. So in fact, McCabe departed to glory, and Hill came, and still here actually.
And you left partly because of that, or?
I left. I really, it was getting me down, making me ill. So I was also over 60 at the time. I can't remember exactly how much, and could go. And then I had an invitation to a chair at Columbia, and that seemed altogether more attractive. Why it seemed more attractive, I don't know. So in the end I thought, well, why did I do that? I can go, I can stay at Columbia as long as I like, with no retiring age.
Yeah.
So I went. And,
I enjoyed it.
I only stayed for 2 years. I realised then I didn't want to teach anymore. That was a real feeling. You get so strongly that you finish with teaching. I don't think you haven't had that.
Not quite, no. I'm just...
Probably weren't you?
No, I'm enjoying it. But I slipped backwards through the tripos, which is an interesting thing I explained to my colleagues. They don't understand that they get out of touch and they're not able to teach right at the top of the... So I really enjoy first year teaching now, and second year to a certain extent. But the things I write about I'm a specialist on, but the broad sweep of the tripos, I know my younger scholars are teaching people who I haven't read and so on. So, but I enjoy the first year very much. So you were only 62 really when you effectively retired.
I suppose I was. Yes.
And you came back to Cambridge then.
I never really left Cambridge.
You kept your house.
Kept the house. I had remarried in 70, I think.
Did either of your wives play any part in your intellectual life? I mean, were they...
Well, my second wife was, in fact, a rather brilliant critic, literary critic. Trained with much admired in certain American circles, not well known here. She did some teaching here.
What was her name? Is her name?
Her name was Van Vactor.
You better spell that.
Sorry?
You better spell that.
V-A-N V-A-C-T-O-R. Anita Van Vactor. And she had some, she helped Tony Tanner with the American courses, and was a fiercely good teacher. I speak of her, she's dead, she's not dead. I don't know whether she's teaching anywhere or not. However, as you gather, that broke up too. So
yes, I did. I was going to, well, there were several further last sort of questions, rounding up questions I'd like to ask you. I always ask people about their religious beliefs, affiliations, non-beliefs.
Well, Church of England choir boy. I think more as a part of social aspiration than anything else. Although my mother was as religious as a woman of her kind at that time would likely to be, I think. I didn't think my father was very religious. I think I am religious, but I haven't got a religion.
Mm. Well, a lot of your poetry, the poetry you like, obviously Milton, Wordsworth, Yeats and so on, are religious poets.
Mm. Herbert is a great favourite.
Is he? Mm.
And well, that's true, and it's religious music, or a lot of religious music is bad, of course, but some of it is important to me.
Mm. So you go to chapel, or just for the music?
I can't even pretend to go often to chapel. I had to choose between the annual Mass and Passion in here or in London, and I chose London this time. I thought here is outside the chapel for a change. And of course that is a totally religious work.
So you're not angry at God. You're not a Dawkinsite.
Well, no. I don't think I'm very pleased with him, actually.
Beta minus. What about Hopkins? Amanda Hopkins, are you fond of him?
Frenetic, I think.
Yeah, isn't it? Many alliterations. But,
No, Herbert is my Anglican poet.
Is he? Yes, I love Herbert.
And Vaughan, of course, very beautiful poet. We haven't had any good religion, except perhaps we have to include Hopkins, I suppose. R.S. Thomas.
Yes, I love Thomas.
Hill, he's a religious poet.
The next question I want to ask you was this title of your autobiography, which you mentioned, Not Entitled. The one other literary critic I've interviewed at depth, George Steiner, asked, I said at the end, is there anything else I should ask you, George? And he said yes. Invidia, envy. I've lived my life on the edge of greatness. I've studied great people. I've been with great scientists. And yes, I know I'm just their servant. I'm just a literary critic. I am beta plus 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 plus. They are alpha. And this has been a sense of sadness and bitterness in my life. But is that what you meant by not entitled, or was it something?
No, I didn't mean that, really. I think that's a position reserved for George. I've heard that story many times.
Have you?
No, mine is, if you read my book, which is it sounds like I'm trying to induce you to do so.
I will.
I explain what the expression means in naval terms. And it's the sailors, or if they're not entitled to any pay, then they put their cap on the table, and normally their money is put on cap. But if they're not entitled to any, the writer says not entitled, and M.E. is inscribed in the ledger, and the sailor goes away saying he's had a northeaster, a northeaster. And this is really about the sense that the wind is against you, which is very unreasonable in my case, I think. I've been very lucky that that's what it is, really. No, it's
so why did you, realizing that you're very lucky, which you have been in many ways, why do you have this sense of the wind being against you, apart from the war?
Well, you say apart from the war, that was 6 years of one's 20s, a big lot. You can hardly, well, it'd be worse to have them out of your teens.
So it's really that.
It's really that. And I suppose with a reference which George couldn't make to poverty of my childhood, general constriction interest as well as money. So it's, I think George goes on saying he keeps sort of banging his head on the door that leads into the first class. You know, he might be saying quietly to himself that he's really there. It's a question simply of having a good violin.
Well, I wondered whether it was institutional, in fact, in a literary critic. I mean, again, thinking of Yeats, the scholars, you know, bald head scratching out things. Well, would they know if their whatever came this way?
What would they say? They could tell us walk
this way. Yes.
Well, he's talking about philologists. They're not saying that. I don't think we're going to make extravagant claims for them, but it's an important trade, practiced at a very low and sometimes vulgar level, I think. But it's an honourable occupation.
Are there any, you mentioned I.A. Richards, are there any literary critics who you, in a sense, model yourself, or at least admire more than others?
I suppose Empson would be the one that I would have to say. That was a relationship of friction, really. Empson was important to me. I didn't like him, and he didn't like me. But we actually wrote together, and later I came to see what a very silly man he was, and after that I was able to use him, I think. He affects the tone of what I write still, I think. Even more he affects Rix's tone, strangely enough. Empson is the most powerful critical mind in our time. He was just a sort of horrible man, I think.
And that, realising that made it easier to use his work. Is that what you were saying?
What happened, one became habituated to his normal, insulting way of treating people. The fact that he was always slightly drunk is really what's behind all that, I think. And the fact that in his last years he suffered from discipleship, in that far too many of his writings were collected and published when they should have been seen that this was doing him a disservice. So I discount all that and go ahead. There are other people. Does Kenneth Burke mean anything to you?
Yes.
Of course it would. Well, there again, something of a crank, but good head on him, as they say. I'd have some effect from him. Some, too, from the much despised French theorists, from people like Derrida, who quite unjustly treated as a kind of madman around here.
Well, one of the many things we didn't have a chance to talk on was your revolutionising the course at the University College, bringing in French, Barthes and Derrida and Foucault and others, shocking the British in their complacency.
Yeah, well, that was a happy moment in my academic life, I think, when without the seminar, which was what you're referring to.
Yes, that's right.
There was nothing extraordinary about it. It was just a regular graduate seminar, and it drifted in that direction, partly through people from Cambridge who came to it. Stephen Heath, do you know him?
Yes, yes.
Jonathan Culler.
Yes, who wrote on structuralism.
That's right, and his wife of the time, Veronica. Do you remember her? Veronica Forrest Thompson. remarkable, which took her own life. Anyway, they would come down, loaded with ideas and so on, and the whole thing grew and grew, and then occasionally we'd get some novelists to come and talk, and then he or she would come back with friends, so it became a quite big event, a rather exhausting one by the time we finished sort of planning it and so on. So that became quite famous, and at that time comment was benign. It seemed to be a proper thing to be doing, which indeed it was, I think. But now, then everything turned very nasty with the McCabe affair.
Is there anything, I notice it's almost your time for your lunch. Yeah. Is there anything that you'd have liked me to have asked you about that I've missed?
I think you've kindly asked most of the important questions.
Well, I got one last one then. Yeah. This is desert island disc stuff. Those great poets you've studied and written about and read, you can only take one to your desert island.
I see. Well, can it be Shakespeare?
Yes, could be Shakespeare.
They give you Shakespeare and another one.
Yes, they do. Yeah. Okay. Well, you're given Shakespeare to make it more interesting, so you can, and the Bible.
Take the Bible. Well, terribly restricting thing. I'd only one. I probably Milton would be a candidate, I think. But I want the lot, all the prose.
Yes, he did write a great deal. And, I was brought up in Hawkshead, and so my youth was Wordsworth, endless Wordsworth, and I'm a great fan of his. But as with music, as soon as I think this is my favourite musician or poet, then I immediately think of all the other ones who are also my favourite.
That's right, I know the feeling.
So it's
well, I was a Wordsworth worshipper. Curious enough, I've never taught a course on Wordsworth. And now there's nobody in the faculty that can teach a course in Milton, but I could, but they don't ask me.
How dreadful. Anyway, thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you.